Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki tēnei hui o te kaunihera o Rotorua. This meeting is being live streamed. Welcome to anyone joining us online. Just a reminder to have your mobile phones turned off, and we will have a break to allow members to clear any urgent messages about 11 a.m. for a morning tea break, and we'll see how we go for lunch and concluding this meeting. Oh, we could give that a go. I would like to ask Councillor Maxwell if he could please open us up with the karakia.
Morena, he ino I tātou. E te atua whakatūwhera te mai ki a mātou ngā kuaha o te tika o te pono o te māramatanga I tēnei wāinga wakatoa. Ko iu kraiti hoki tō mātou kai whakaora. Āmene. Kia ora koutou.
Amen. Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. Any apologies for this morning? Yes, Councillor Yates.
I've just had an apology for lateness for Councillor Wang.
Thank you very much. We'll take Councillor Wang for lateness and also an apology from Ms Rothwell. There appear to be no others. May I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Mr Waru, seconded by Councillor Yates. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? Any urgent items not on the agenda? We'll move then to the confirmation of minutes, which is on page 6, and thank you very much to Councillor Yates, the Deputy Chair, for covering for me while I was on Zoom. I appreciated that very much. Can I ask for a mover and a seconder that the minutes of the Operations and Monitoring Committee meeting 7th of July be confirmed as true and correct? Moved by Councillor Okawa-Tate, seconded by Councillor Donaldson. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. We'll move to our staff reports on page 10, and we'll start with the financial performance for the 12 months ended 30th of June. I ask for a mover and a seconder to receive this report, that the report financial performance for the 12 months ended 30th June 2022 be received. Moved by Mr Hurd, seconded by Councillor Kaifong. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you, and good morning, Madam Chair, councillors and board members. I'm just going to do a quick update on the draft 12-month result for the end of June. I say draft because obviously we've now started the annual report cycle where the auditors are now starting to work remotely, and we'll be making all the end-of-year adjustments such as asset capitalisations, write-offs, provisions and all the dull things that take a result that's fairly easy to understand and probably convert it into something that's a little bit more difficult to interpret, unfortunately. So it's, as I said, it's been a difficult year, but overall the financial result has actually been quite pleasing in light of all the challenges that we've faced. So the draft result is a $10.3 million surplus with no debt used to fund operating expenses. The operational result itself is within 2% of budget, so while we did come under immense pressure in the cost side of our business as a result of COVID, inflation and all the rest, we were able to offset that with some additional revenues and underspending in some other areas as well. And so while it was a difficult year, there was minimal to no impacts in our levels of service to our community. We did have the most ambitious capital works program for quite some time, and we achieved about 2/3 of that. And those that didn't go ahead were obviously deferred because of a range of reasons and are expected to be started in this financial year. And we also had quite a high completion of renewal work for our core infrastructure. And as I said, the challenges that we've had, there was a lockdown in this financial year, ongoing COVID, visitors, inflation really surprised everyone come around December time, and that's impacted us. Probably the biggest challenge that we still have at the moment is staff attraction and retention, and that is a challenge, again, no different from anyone else, but that hasn't gone away either, and if anything is probably getting a little bit worse at the moment. And then just that whole global shortage of, it seems, everything at the moment that's making everyone's life in New Zealand a challenge at a time. So the year in review, sorry, a little bit hard to see, the grey's not coming through, but fees and charges were obviously impacted, most significantly from the events and venues space. our operational spend as well with regards to facing additional expenditure to support community safety and housing, but there was some offsetting going on elsewhere as well. The capital investment, which I talked about before, and just the headcount, and unfortunately you can't see that grey line, but if you could, you'll see that we're probably carrying quite a substantial amount of vacancies compared to a year ago, and it probably is now starting to impact, and at the moment as well with COVID making a resurgence as well and a high level of sickness, things are becoming challenging in places for our team. But at the moment, as I said, no impact in levels of service. And then just a bit of a summary again. So, you know, we applied for the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund. We're focusing on community safety and strategy, a significant focus on housing and growth. We also had the landfill legal challenge from the Regional Council regarding that significant weather and storm event that caused some issues. We've faced CPI increases, massive increases from costs from contractors and also contractors' availability, and we've also supported QE Health with regards to their building, which is progressing incredibly well, and I understand the roofing is now weather tight and they're waiting for it to dry. Obviously they've been challenged by that significant rainfall event in early July, but that is also progressing well. And so, yeah, it's been a difficult year, so it's been really pleasing to end the year the way that we have. And just a reminder again, our Capital Works program was under pressure, remains under pressure, and just like everyone else in New Zealand, we are having to juggle. We're having to make decisions around how we go to procurement. We are having decisions about choosing what to do and when to do, and that's just the approach that we're having to take to ensure that we're able to complete our Capital Works program going forward. So with that, happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Thomas. That was well covered. Your Worship, the Mayor.
Just a question, and then later I'd like to comment as well. Is there a project that's driven you crazy this year that you thought we could have done faster or done better?
There always is, Your Worship. There's probably a number of key projects, community projects, that the community would probably wish would be moving faster than they are. But I think when you stretch away at them, you probably understand the reasons of why they've taken so long. So,
do you want me to make a comment later?
Yes, we'll take some comments later, but any questions? We'll go with Councillor Rotorua, then Councillor Kumar.
Morena, Thomas. Thomas, in terms of staff retention and attraction, do we have, I mean, because this is more right throughout the country, obviously, do we have a strategy for that? Can I just share with you that some years ago I was working for a government department and we actually asked staff, did they know someone, particularly people, their mates around the country who are working in the same discipline, and we enlisted their support to bring people in because we were undergoing a similar situation we've got now. And I just wondered if we've actually got a strategy that looks a little bit wider than, following the situations vacant in the newspapers and on social media. Do we actually have anything like that?
We do. So Joe and his team did prepare a new strategy about 3 months ago, and we obviously try and go through as many channels as possible in word of mouth, and about 3 to 4 months ago as well we recruited a new talent and attraction role within that team, whose sole purpose is obviously to understand where the challenges are, what they are, why we're not able to recruit in that area, and to approach things differently as well. So we have got some good results recently with regards to recruitment. It's not as dire as it could be, but it is challenging. So we're seeing some positive improvements going forward at the moment, but it is challenging.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Through the chair, thank you very much. Good morning, Thomas. Good to see you nice and back after your little break. My question is very low level regarding finance. I see you have mentioned that there is some, because of parking, revenues are down. But just wondering, whether if across the years, because now we've got a new system in place for the last 4 years, are we taking, if things were normal, are we taking more revenue now through parking than when we've outsourced it?
I don't have those figures on hand, but from a memory recollection with regards to setting of the budgets over those years, I think we are budgeting for more than we probably have for quite some time, and we're not too far off those, so I'd expect therefore that we're not doing too bad on that space.
Supplementary. And my second question is with regards to, I see that there is a surplus because we've, in terms of staffing, where we've saved, but how are we getting through the workload? Are we outsourcing anything to other agencies?
Sometimes we are, yes. So in some cases we are having to employ consultants and contractors to fill the vacancy where staff are, or sometimes as well work is having to be prioritised and not everything that we'd like to do is able to be done. And that's just how it's currently being managed. I'd just like to reiterate that even though we are experiencing those challenges, just like a lot of businesses in Rotorua and New Zealand are, it's not unique to us. At the moment, we're not seeing any material impact in levels of service to our community.
Thank you, through the chair. The reason I asked that is that because when we can see that there's a savings of maybe about 700K, I'm just wondering how much of that is offsetted by, because we are outsourcing some of the work anyway. So how can that be?
Probably most of it would be being offset. It's very unusual for a contractor to be more cost effective than a staff member. So usually when we're having to make those decisions, it is costing more to get a contractor in. Yes.
Thank you. Mr Waru, followed by Councillor Maxwell.
Tēnā koe te tiamana, o te rā morena tata. Kia ora, Thomas. My question is really centred around the capital expenditure for the last 12 months. Just wondering, because that's a massive investment, millions. Do we have any information or data around how much of an impact that made on our local economy as opposed to external contractors coming in to do the mahi?
Not on hand. We can pull that information. By far, the majority of the work is done through preferred suppliers. That's done predominantly through locals, but there are a handful of contracts, in particular the bigger ones, like the Performing Arts Centre, where the head contractor may be out of town, but they are using local subcontractors as well. So I'd imagine the majority of the spend is having a good local impact.
Thank you. I'll be keen to have a look at that data. Kia ora.
Thank you. And where possible, we do prioritise local capability if we can. Last question from Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, and a comment later, but my question's on page 11, and that's regarding the 85 million that we received for the Capital Works program. Tremendous. I think that was really great, and really it was only last month that we discussed that. So bouquet to yourselves and the senior team, JP and the team who put this forward to us. My question was, we achieved 58% of our Capital Works program. So can I ask the other 40%, is that going to come from our own funds, or that might be held back because we've done so well receiving the 85 million?
The portion that we didn't complete, most of it was forecast very early on to be deferred into the next fiscal year. And so the majority of those projects were either debt funded or funded externally by government, and in which case substantially. And so there's a mix of how those projects will be funded. And just a reminder, with regards to when we set the annual plan for now this new current year, or being year 2, that we've made provision for obviously the timing and the funding of those projects. So even though they've been deferred, all the funding has also been deferred along with it.
Thank you. Councillor Kaifong, and then we'll open for discussion.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, my question was actually following on from Councillor Maxwell. It was in a similar vein, which was really just with the holdover of the capital expenditure, what would be the additional impact by delaying it, because obviously there are going to be increased construction costs and increased debt funding for them. So is there a likely impact and cost?
Those impacts will only be known obviously when those projects go to tender, and then we'll see how they fall, and will have to be managed on a case-by-case basis. But as we've probably experienced over the last 3 to 4 months, yes, we are seeing price escalations, and we are having to make decisions on how to balance those, and we'll have to continue to do that going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and I did have a point for discussion from Her Worship the Mayor and then Councillor Maxwell, and if there's anyone else, just let me know. Your Worship the Mayor.
Well, Thomas, I find this, you're quite understated really, saying this is a satisfactory year-end position. We as elected members wait nervously to see what the real picture is, and you talked about the wash-up of what you've got to do for purposes of audit, but to have a surplus after a year that we've been through, even though it's a reduced surplus from what you budgeted, to have a surplus of 10.3 million is very, very sound financial management. And you and your team and the entire executive is to be congratulated for that. It's been a horrible year, and I think you've done exceptionally well. When we're now opening the borders for international visitors, we've got a great sense of pride as a community about the level of investment that actually tells the story of our place. And I'm so glad that we didn't put a hold on those major projects at all. But there's another sense of pride that I think says a lot more, and it's the culture of this organisation. For those of us that go to the porphyry for new staff, and you talk about attracting staff, the level of capability and the international experience of those that we're attracting is phenomenal. And that says a lot about the culture of the executive team, attracting in some very high calibre people. And then you talk about service, that you've maintained service levels. I'm probably the filter for most people that come through to me when they don't go through the customer service centre. And it's salutary for them to know that we're maintaining services in this COVID environment where, as Joe reports later, some days there's 20 staff off sick in the organisation with COVID alone, not just that and flu. So I think the team's to be congratulated for that. Another bouquet that I wanted to give is about this building. This building, 9 years ago, we loved it. We loved the building, but it really was dysfunctional. Now it's a sense of pride. It is truly a civic centre. And we tell the story so much better. And that's a project that you've seen through to completion. I'm very proud when I see the Fenton Agreement up in my office for a future mayor. I'm very proud when we tell the story of Wood, when we tell the story of being a bilingual and a bicultural community. This building now does emanate that essence, and you're to be congratulated. The other is, for me, and I've got to say it before I go, I keep seeing that $1 million for QE. The investment that is going to flow for this town from that is yet to be realised. I'm now being approached about Australasian health and wellbeing tourism and the potential by us just having secured and proceeded with Queen Elizabeth. It's not a rehabilitation service for our people alone. It's a national and international centre. So that level of investment, I call it, is going to yield returns for us all and for wellbeing. Well done on the capital projects. That's been a tough call. So I'm really proud, actually, as an outgoing mayor, that with the support of the team, you've pulled things in very tightly. I know I haven't got my baby projects through, and I won't mention what they were, but that's because they they didn't rate on the scale of good investment into our wider community. I think we've kept the right things going at the right pace in readiness for us opening up and for a new council to enjoy. That is a very sound financial position. I want to congratulate the team.
Thank you, Your Worship. Was there anyone else wanting to discuss? Councillor Maxwell?
I just wanted to comment on what I touched on earlier with the question about, I've still been celebrating since we heard the good news about that 85 million that we received. And having seen the publicity where it says it's bringing it forward from 30 years down to 7 or 9, something like that, does it mean it alters any of those graphs that you've given us in the past to make it even better for us here in Rotorua? And there was only one other thing. One is, now that the decision has been taken away from councils in a way regarding fluoride, will it be in the future that we don't have to have a say in it and let it go? Because that would please me.
So
We might leave the fluoride question to perhaps Regan when we get into infrastructure and environmental. But the other questions, if you wanted to answer, Thomas?
Yeah, I'll avoid the fluoride one. It was very pleasing to see the IAF. Yes, it does bring forward a significant level of expenditure that obviously will hopefully deliver a significant number of new housing. It does put pressure on our financial strategy, but just like everything at the moment is putting pressure on us, unfortunately it is probably something for the new council to consider probably in its first annual plan going forward, and its LTP directly afterwards with regards to the impacts of all the things that we're currently experiencing. But at the moment, we are able to make that fit. I'll just say one last thing as well, which I probably should have said before. Unfortunately, the incoming council will have to approve the annual report. Because of delays with Audit New Zealand, it's unlikely that that will take place in October, and we are looking at adopting our annual report in December, which will be incredibly late, but unfortunately Audit New Zealand still hasn't been able to fill all their vacancies in staffing, and they're still trying to recover from the workload from the previous 2 years, and so we'll just have to fit within their timeframes. So just a bit of a warning there, obviously, for the new council. Cool.
Thank you. Now we've got Mr. Waru, followed by Councillor Kumar and then Councillor Yates.
Tēnā anō koe te chairmana. Kia ora, Thomas. Thank you for your report. Now, I stand to be corrected. I'm just looking at the report there, and I read it through last night. That's our position that you'll put on the report for the 12 months gone by June 30th, ending June 30th, correct?
It's the draft result, yes.
Yeah, draft result, cover. What is our overall position? Is that against the budget for that year, or?
That is the overall against the budget.
Overall, okay, yep. Kapai, thank you.
Thank you. And we are into discussion time now, but that's okay. So we'll go to Councillor Kumar and then Councillor Yates.
Through the chair, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again, Thomas. Thomas, I can understand from what you've delivered over here, when we see the cost pressures that has to be realistic. Over the last 12 months, we've seen not only labour shortage, not only have we seen the material prices go high because of shortage and shipping problems, shipping's gone up. So I think you've done a wonderful job over here as per what the situation is. And going forward, hopefully, you know, if the situation, see, we've seen petrol prices going down, we now see wheat coming back, you know, we see Jeep coming back. So hopefully when your managers come running up to you and say, hey, look, man, 10 pipes have bust, but they were costing $5, but they're now costing $25, the money's got to come somewhere in the organization because the problem's got to be fixed. There's climate change and there's maintenance. So I think with that in mind and looking into the future, hopefully it's a little bit more level playing field.
Thank you. Councillor Yates.
Through you, Madam Chair, nei rā te mihi ki a koe, Thomas. O tina koto ohu, e hapai nei tēnei kaupapa. Just like to commend you, as has been mentioned by fellow councillors, this is our last O&M, so as Deputy Chair I'd like to commend you and the team for the contribution you have provided to our whole council. I'm absolutely impressed with the draft result that we've achieved thus far, and once the auditors have their final comment, I'm sure we'll fly through with great colours. The staff culture that Mayor Chadwick spoke about is something that I'd also like to acknowledge our team and our staff with, because that is actually the example that is demonstrating to staff who are considering a role within our council that they are observing and seeing, as has been discussed by some of the current staff who've only just arrived to me. The two other last things that I'd like to talk about, as Mayor Chadwick also mentioned, was the $1 million to QE2. I'm still hearing throughout our community how excited our wider community, and as Mayor Chadwick had also mentioned, throughout the Polynesian circle as well, and as we also knew, New Caledonia were high visitors to the QE2. But once QE2 is underway, I do believe that that's going to give us greater benefit as a community as we move forward. And finally, just on the Resilience Fund, I think after COVID, the Resilience Fund was one fund that we definitely saw used by our wider community once again. And whilst it was a little bit of an out of scope consideration at the time in 2020, coming to this particular point in 2022, I'm seeing the benefits of how that's been used through our wider community. So nei rata mihi kauatu, kia koutou, kia ora.
Well, thank you very much. That concludes our financial performance for the 12 months. We'll now move into our operational report for June 2022. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the operational report for June 2022? Moved by Councillor Donaldson, seconded by Councillor Okawate. All those in favour, please say aye. And I'll invite Thomas to now overview the Organisational Enablement Group. And welcome to Joe Akari as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to take the report as read. However, Joe has been asked to come up and just to talk about COVID and all things and the impact, and just explain to you how things are going and what our responses are.
Morena tātou. Yes, we thought it would be useful to give you a bit of an update on where we are with respect to our COVID response. I guess as we've had throughout at this period, our two greatest priorities: number one, keeping our staff safe, and secondly, maintaining core services during this time. So, as you know, we track our COVID cases on a daily basis. So we have a status report every morning that we produce. Now, I can tell you that during our first Omicron wave, at our peak, when we look back, was on the 18th of March, and at that time we had the most number of cases on that day, which was 20 confirmed cases. And since then, of course, since March, the cases have reduced. We had an average run rate since the end of March of somewhere around about 5 confirmed cases a day. So at 5 confirmed cases a day running through on average, that's meant that we are managing to mitigate risks in terms of infection within the council, but also from the business continuity perspective, we're able to maintain delivery services. So as we all know, the model has predicted a second wave, and of course we've been tracking it as we have. And I can inform you that this Tuesday, 2nd August, we again reached 20 cases. So if we look at previous trends, we're saying we think we're at our second wave at the moment, and that's been a result of a steady rise in cases throughout July. The interesting thing when we look back, because we track all by individual, we haven't seen any cases yet in the council of reinfection. So all of these are first-time infections. So that's been an interesting thing for us to review. Also, so as an example, one of the areas that was really badly hit in the first wave was customer solutions team. and they went through their various strategies to maintain services. And so far at the moment, the only absences that they have at the moment is due to winter illnesses. They don't have any COVID cases there at the moment. However, within those 20 cases, there are occasional times where there are multiple people that are impacted. So right now, if I look at those numbers, the consent processing team currently, they had minimal impact in the first wave. They were badly hit during this wave. During this time, as you would expect, we're also experiencing the compounding effects of the winter illnesses throughout this period. It's not excessive. It mirrors the normal seasonal trends from year-on-year comparisons, but again, it's compounding on top of COVID at the moment. If you recall, in terms of mitigations, about 150 of our staff took advantage of flu vaccinations that we provided this year. So I want to say that at the moment we are still maintaining support for our staff. We're still delivering core services, but we are seeing some pressure points at the moment. So again, for me, the example of the consents processing team at the moment, so not only high levels of absences due to COVID and some winter illnesses, but they also have their standards in terms of delivery, particularly around the 20 days, in terms of processing. So that is one team that is still delivering at this point, but they are under pressure as a result of what we're experiencing at the moment. And again, because we're in this, what we see is a second wave, all the normal business continuity strategies that we had developed early in the year, those are coming back into play at the moment, again with the view to keeping our staff safe and also maintaining core services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Are there any questions? You're open for questions now. Councillor Okawate.
Thank you. It's just around the going to the cloud centre, and how's that going? Is it this customer services is all set to go, and has everything been ironed out, or are we going to be running a parallel service for a little while?
It went live last Tuesday seamlessly. It was, if anything, it was a little bit of an experience for the team because it was obviously new, but by the end of the day it was pretty much signed off by the team, and they did a fantastic job to bring in a new phone service without anyone really noticing. So there we go.
Well done. Councillor Kumar.
Through the chair, thank you, Joe, thank you, Thomas. Thomas, we talking about organisational enablement over here. I see we've got an open, plain working policy. We've gone through COVID, where social distancing and everything was very important. Now we've got a wave coming where there's a lot of staff down. How does that affect our productivity? Because if we are still working in an open plan, or are we allowing people to work from home?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll answer that. So, as I said, we had developed a number of strategies around business development that anticipated high levels of absence, and a core of those strategies have been looking at remote working. So my team, as an example, we're a small team, so we don't like the idea, the risk of losing the whole team, through COVID. So we've split into two teams. One team works in the office this week. The other half is working remotely. We're well enabled by our IT team, so we're still able to manage and work through our workload. We meet daily online just to keep in touch, which is an important part of the remote working approach. So yes, we've been careful in terms of social distancing, but also putting those strategies in place.
Just supplementary to it is, and I'm not challenging it, but I'm just wondering, when I talked about productivity, is when people are working so close to each other and in the environment we are, how do you still get productivity if you are one person's on the phone, the other person's on the phone, the third person's on the phone? So if you have to make a phone call that's in privacy relating to getting your work done, would you go outside the building? Would you go to your staff room or?
So as part of the refurbishment of the building that obviously the Mayor talked about, we do have a lot of meeting spaces and quiet rooms, so staff are more than able to use those for phone calls. Needless to say that when the majority of the work that our staff do, they're not having to make private phone calls away from other staff. And so that we've got the facilities to allow that. Just as a reminder, we have been investing quite significantly into our technology stack, and in particular rolling out more mobility to our staff over the last couple of years. So pretty much the majority of our staff are actually able to undertake their duties and work from home as required. And while I haven't been at work for the last 3 weeks, my understanding is that there have been plenty of people during that time that have been working from home and able to do so very productively. And obviously we manage productivity not by the effort and people sitting at their computer, but by the outputs and the outcomes that our team achieves.
Very well put, Thomas. Thank you. We've got Councillor Maxwell, then Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Talofa lava, Joe. The question I have is on the mobility devices and everything with the rollout of the mobile devices. Is this for all staff or just key staff who are doing certain services?
It's a bit of a mix. So many years ago, we'd run a technology stack where we run virtual desktops. So anyone with a computer at home or on a mobile device could access their work functions. Over the last few years, we've actually been rolling out more laptops to improve the mobility and working environment where people are working from home. And the majority of the staff are actually transitioning now to laptops.
Thank you. Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Thomas and Joe. It's really great to see the modernisation across the organisation with the transition to Microsoft Teams and also the upgrades to One Council and like what Councillor Rotorua mentioned, the upgrades to the cloud as well. My question was just around the COVID impacts and if there's been, as someone who is experiencing the ongoing effects of COVID, long COVID, what support system or what's there to, if there are any people that do unfortunately catch COVID and have those ongoing symptoms of, you know, brain fog and having trouble to focus, vertigo, that kind of thing?
We follow up with every individual who contracts COVID, and we work through with them. We've had one reported case of long COVID within council. So with respect to provision of special leave and those sorts of things, we've applied those in that case. In terms of EAP, in terms of support, we've provided those. We have our regular visits from our occupational health nurse as well in terms of providing that level of support. And certainly my team continue to follow up with that individual. So we haven't seen a lot of that, but my view is that we would replicate that sort of support.
Thank you very much. Well, that concludes our questions for the Organisational Enablement Group, and thank you, Joe, for that overview and the support that you're providing our staff who need it. Thank you. We will now move to page 17, our District Leadership and Democracy Group, and I'd like to invite Deputy Chief Executive Una Hopkins to overview her report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Morning, elected members. I am going to take my report as read. However, there are a couple of items that I wish to sort of highlight and update, which are all based largely around the up and coming elections, which are on the 8th of October. You're probably all well aware that nominations close for our 3 wards, our 2 community boards, and the position of Mayor on the 12th of August. It has been a little bit slow in terms of seeing those nominations coming in, but as of sort of yesterday and again this morning, that interest is ramping up quite quickly, and we suspect that the team is going to be rather busy over the next week and a bit while those nominations come in. In light of the nominations closing, we held a second candidate information session on the 27th of July. That was hosted here in the chamber, and it was also recorded, so encourage everybody to have take an opportunity to visit Council's website and have a look at that recording. There's a wealth of information in there around what I call the rules of engagement of preparing and running a successful campaign for members, and just understanding some of the rules and regulations that go around an election campaign, in particular things like signs and the likes. So that is available on Council's website. Also, just a correction to the report. The pre-election report was published onto Council's website on the 29th of July, so that was Friday afternoon. I think the report states the 1st, so just a typo there, it was the 29th. So the pre-election report at the moment is totally digital on Council's website. We are having hard copies available, and hard copies will also be delivered to households in our district. It is intended that that mail drop of the pre-election report will coincide with the voting papers that will be sent out to all households in the district, and that's from roughly around the 16th of September. But we are making available hard copies to organisations, community groups, candidates. When we know who all of the candidates are, we'll also have the opportunity to have a small supply of hard copy pre-election reports, and there are more available on request if needed. I think that is all. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Una, just a short one. Special voting arrangements. When does special voting open, and where are the locations, please?
Cool. Thank you. So special voting can happen from the 16th of September right through till voting day on the 8th of October. Special voting is done here in the council offices. We will have booked out committee room 1 and 2, so there's opportunities for people to come in and cast their special vote there. We can also send out voting forms, so if people don't receive their voting papers within that period, that sort of 16th to the 21st of September, we can post them out. We will probably be encouraging, though, people to actually come in and do a special vote here in the building. And just saying that, that's really based on sort of the postal service and everything as well. And I suppose one last final little plug is that for people who are voting and using the postal system, make sure you post your voting papers, your voting return papers in nice and early, so that it ensures they do arrive and can be counted on the 8th of October.
Thank you. Now, Your Worship, the Mayor.
Comment really. I want to commend the communications team. If you look at the Facebook and website, that is where I see factual information going out from council that we own, and it talks about process. And a lot more people are looking at that now, and I'm really impressed to see 71% increase in new visitors. So that counters some misinformation that is promulgated, and people go to that site and see the background and the build of any issue actually that we're dealing with at council. That is very important communication, and I'm very pleased to see that it's ramping up at the rate it is. And even in the last month, your Facebook has increased 30%. So it shows that that's where we need to own the right information that's held in the pre-election report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Yates, and then followed by Councillor Kumar.
Just confirming if it's questions or if it's opened up now for discussion as well.
There doesn't appear to be many other questions, so we will open up for discussion and questions now if you'd like.
Hi. It's a compliment to the team as well, because I know that we've also had new members come into our comms and marketing team. And just on the marketing, to follow on from Mayor Chadwick, just to commend the team, because the recent publications of comms and marketing has actually been outstanding. So thank you. The education that comes with that is what's key. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Una. I just wanted to touch on the consultation process. A lot of people say that it's very challenging and not easy to find. Is it because they have to delve into opening lots of apps or avenues before they can get to it? There's been quite a healthy and robust discussion on Facebook about it. I don't think people, well, I'm not going to express what words they're using, but one person did say this morning that she found it in 5 seconds. Maybe she's very savvy in how she used it, and that was Helen Brumby. But everybody else that came on it were probably quite anti it. So I'm just wondering whether the process is simple and easy, but people are having trouble.
Sorry, Councillor, I need you to be a bit more specific with your question. You talked about consultation.
Like Rotorua, what's your active? People have thought that when they want to go over to submit something, opening it up and looking for where to open and where to submit has been the real challenge.
Okay. I'll have to follow that one up. I'm unaware that people were having challenges with that, and I'll have to get some response back to you on that one.
And maybe if we just encourage people, there's a number of platforms that Council has been sharing this information, whether it's through print copy and newspaper, online through the website, or through our Facebook social media page. So just encourage people to follow those avenues, and if they need to, they can always give Council a call to find it, and someone will help. So that appears to be all of the question and discussion for democracy and leadership. We will move on to our Te Aroha Partnership Group. I invite our Deputy Chief Executive, Gina Rangi, up, and we are on page 22.
Tēnā tātou. I think many of the kaupapa in here are familiar to the elected members, so I think probably the one thing I did want to highlight was the exhibition wānanga being held with iwi and hapu of Te Aroha in respect of the exhibitions for Te Whare Taonga. So we all know that Te Whare Taonga is closed and that it's going through a rebuilding process. And part of preparing for the opening is to start talking with Te Aroha about what they want to see in terms of the taonga that we hold within Te Whare Taonga and the stories that they want shared. It takes a long time of discussion with people to get them thinking about it and to settle on the right stories. One of the things we're really mindful of is the fact that there is an engagement, that there is a decision-making process yet to occur with Te Whare Taonga. So it's really important to understand that whatever happens in terms of the building itself, we are the custodian of particular taonga. There are many ways that we can share the stories, including potentially digitally. We continue to have education and school outreach programs with people coming into both Te Aka Māori and also school visits and hapu visits to the off-site as well to visit particular taonga. So while this engagement process is particularly focused on rethinking how we present taonga for the reopened Whare Taonga, irrespective of the time frame for completing the build project, this work is really important and necessary anyway, because whatever happens with the building, we are still the custodian of taonga and they are still being shared with our community. The very first wānanga was held on the 4th of June. So we've gone out and met with iwi and hapu a number of times to start them thinking about the process, but the actual first wānanga was on the 4th of June at Kia Roa Marae, and it was incredibly well received. There's a particular taonga named Horoirangi, which has been in the care of the museum for some years now, and it was the first time that Horoirangi had been returned to the marae for the hapu that are her guardians to welcome and to share their kōrero about the importance of that particular taonga. What was really rewarding was to see the breadth of generations that attended. So you had children, you had rangatahi, you had adults, you had elders, experiencing this amazing return of that taonga for the day. So really well received. We've had a lot of interest from other iwi as a result of that of the success of that first wānanga, wanting to know when they can schedule theirs as well. So there's a couple of photos in there which show Te Pukinga Koike bringing Horoirangi back onto the marae, and a couple of shots inside the wharenui as well. Any questions?
Thank you, Gina. Councillor Okawate.
Thank you, kia ora. Thank you, Gina. Gina, it's in relation to Matariki, and of course the 250,000 Te Arawhiti grant was very helpful. So for the inaugural Matariki celebrations, and there were a number of them, and very well attended and received. What's going to happen next year? Are we looking to source funds from elsewhere, or is it just going to be self-funding for the events? How do we see that rolling out?
I'm not aware of any additional Te Arawhiti funding. Presumably if that opens again, we'll apply again. We won't be able to necessarily rely on that, so my team are thinking about what worked well this year, what we would want to extend on, what we might change for the program. Healthy Families Rotorua have also conducted some surveys of the community participation to see what people want to see for next year, and then once we're clear on what that program might look like, we'll start applying for funding again.
Thank you. We'll open up for discussion now too. Councillor Yates, followed by Councillor Maxwell, and then Mr Wadu.
Tēnā koe, through you, Madam Chair. Me mihi ka tika ki a koe, Gina, o tira koto ohu hoki. I was very privileged to go out to Kia Roa Marae and assist with the return of Horoirangi, and that is a pure demonstration of our living whare taonga. To see our haukainga for the first time actually hear her story was moving. So if any of us, including elected members, get the opportunity to travel with our taonga to their respective marae around Rotorua, around Te Arawa, I encourage you to do so, because it was just so special to be a part of that. So thank you for the opportunity, and thank you on behalf of our whānau in enabling that to happen too. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Gina, for the excellent report. The one I want to comment on is that our hearings last week, our chairperson, Merapeka Raukawa allowed us to have a kōrero in between our breaks on things from the recent conference. I want to thank you and our staff that put forward on behalf of RLC and Ngāti Rangi Webuhi in the New Zealand Excellence Awards section for Taniwha Springs and Home. So a bouquet and a big thanks to the staff that helped on that. And the highly commended and the runner-up one we received, we were just celebrating that we were a finalist, but that really made the tribe even better. We're still celebrating drinking lots of water. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Mr Wadu.
Tēnā koe. Pore na Gina. Tuatai ake rā kai te miha turia kia koe o tira ki tō tīma. Kia te amorangi, nui ngā mahi. So it looks like you've been busy bees when I read the report. Well, no, Matariki was awesome, so tērā tērā. Engari, Ngāti Kia Roa, Ngāti Tura Heads of Agreement, what's the hold up there?
It was approved last week at the SPNF committee, and we're working on a signing date at the moment, probably to be held at Rotorua Pounamu, but just working on confirming that at the moment.
Thank you. I thought something went on handbrake or something after that. So, ka pai. E pā te anō tāku. So, rawe te whakarongo atu kua I hoki a horoi raki ki te kāinga. He atua. He atua. He atua wahine. So, it's beautiful to hear that. Te taha to the waiata classes, I hear good things. It's getting pretty big. Is there any thought of adding an extra one in somehow?
At the moment, no. I will ask Clark what his thoughts are around evolving the program. I know he gets huge interest from the public on the monthly public ones, and it's a really important way of drawing in different people into Te Aka Māori in different parts of the community to feel a sense of belonging into Te Aka Māori, but also for patrons of Te Aka Māori to have some sort of very sociable and easy contact with Dal Māori and to feel all of the positive things that flow from having that as a normal part of daily life, civic life. In respect of Matariki, I did want to acknowledge the support that came from Te Tatau o Te Arawa, who umbrellaed the funding and supported council in that regard to ensure that we had really good coverage across Te Arawa, so I just want to acknowledge that as well. And finally, in terms of Te Wharetanga o Te Arawa and the return of Horoirangi, that's a key part of our strategy of trying to get more people involved in the engagement. We know at the moment that people are fatigued, they don't want to go to hui, there's a lot going on, different consultations, central government, local government, iwi processes as well. So one of the strategies that Clark and Manaki developed was to take taonga in consultation with Te Pukenga Koike and with the hapu that relate to that particular hapu and iwi, as a way to encourage more people to come to the event, and it's been really successful. So I just want to acknowledge the really careful thinking from Clark and Manaki and all the work that goes in around that to get the right permissions to take those taonga onto the marae.
Tēnā koe, Gina. Just another couple questions, please. The taonga, so you've got the Ngāti Pakawe, Ngāti Rangitime, Ngāti Tarawhainia, talking about all that stuff. So how much, I know there are some taonga that are whānau taonga, and there are some taonga that are hapu, iwi, iwi wide. Are those whānau being spoken to too on an individual basis?
We would never take a taonga that relates to a particular whānau without speaking to the nominated representatives for those whānau. That's a really important part of being entrusted to look after those taonga. So that's it's very much, and so there's often circles of groups that you need to talk to in order to make this happen in a way that's safe. So you need to talk to the particular individual or the whānau who have lodged that taonga with us. You need to talk to the hapu, the marae, the iwi, Pukenga Koike. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to make it happen.
Kia ora. Gina, well, ahua he ui maki hoi ke tera. It's a bit of a rhetorical question. I knew the answer, but I just thought to put it on the record because there's a lot of people e kōrero pērā ana about, they're just throwing our tongue around and I said, kao, it would not happen. So thank you to the team and e mohu ana kai te tika ngā mahi. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Kaifong, and then we'll wrap up with Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Chair. Morena, Gina. It was just a question that came out of the hearings for the reserve revocation, and it was a submission that was made by Te Tātou o Te Arawa around the lack of early engagement for a land disposal policy with the offer of lands back to iwi. So I was just wondering if there is work being undertaken around the land disposal policy.
Well, kia ora. I had a little bit of a panic when I heard that, so I went back and talked to Thomas, his team, just to get really clear on the dates. The property disposal policy was approved by the council in October 2017. At that time, we did have, it did go to the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee, at which Eugene and Gina Mohi were sitting at that time. they provided both written feedback before it got to SPF as well as verbal feedback at the committee meeting. Following that, there was a process to get to the council meeting at the end of that month of making sure that all of their feedback, both the written and the verbal, was reflected in the policy before it went to council for final decision making. It was reviewed in 2020, and on the website it says policy created 2020. That was when the policy was reviewed. There were no changes made at that time. So the actual policy was adopted by Council 2017 with feedback direct from Te Tatau and direct involvement. It hasn't been, there was a review in 2020, other than that it hasn't been changed. So we've written to Te Tatau just to make sure that that's clear and to give that reassurance. I can understand why they would have been pretty upset to have heard that there was a new policy that they hadn't been involved in of such significance, but just to reassure that that hadn't happened.
Her Worship, the Mayor has a point on that.
It's another question around the hearings, and if you could just clarify, East Side spoke about not having been consulting with mana whenua around the affected reserves there. Can you clarify that, please, Gina?
Yes, so Council will remember that in the workshop, I think in February, which was subsequently leaked to the media, but at that workshop we did talk about the need to begin mana whenua discussions at that time. So the reason we did that was we wanted to engage with mana whenua. We didn't want elected members to hear about that engagement without knowing themselves directly from staff. So we notified the elected members. We then went out and engaged directly with mana whenua before the public consultation process. In respect specifically of East Side, we did write to who we had understood to be the relevant mana whenua for the reserves. We did make an error, my team made an error in that we don't have a confirmed boundary for Ngāti Uenuku Kōpako, and so we inadvertently left them off the list for Lee Road. They my understanding is that that's slightly outside of their core area of interest, but they do still have some interest in that area, and we should have gone to speak to them in that regard. We held a meeting with, let me just see if I can find it. We did have a meeting directly with Ngāti Uenuku Kōpako, myself and JP, on I think the 20-something of July, to make sure that they understood all of the background, to provide any information and questions that they had requested, and to basically seek feedback directly. It was a really good meeting, and out of that my team is also going to sit with them to get their boundaries GIS mapped so that in future we don't make the same mistakes. But apart from that one error, all of those reserves were referred to the mana whenua.
Thank you. And sorry, Mr. Wadi, did you have a follow-up on that before I move on? Over to you.
Kia ora. And on that part too. What boundary are you referring to? The tribal boundary or the what boundary for the Uenuku Kōpako kōrero?
In terms of what we will be mapping, we will be mapping the area that they wish to be informed of kaupapa. So that will be both where they are the primary mana whenua, but also areas where they recognise that someone else may have the main right, but nevertheless they have some form of interest that needs to be taken into account and protected. One of the things for council is that we don't have a policy of just engaging with those who have the primary right. There can be layers of interests and different kinds of interest, and our job is to inform you as the decision makers is to be clear on all of those layers of interest, how they are being affected. So, for example, Ngāti Rangiwiwihi have an area of interest that recognises both their primary rohe, but then they also have a bigger rohe, which is where they still want to be notified of kaupapa because there may be some impact on them. And we can do that with Uenuku Kōpako as well.
Oh no, that's tino paitira. Actually, yeah, I was going to start. Otherwise, I was going to start cutting up. Kaiha ngā rohe o tēnā. But nah, paitira, because you know, gotta ahakoa he mana kai tēnei taha o te awa. You know, still he pānga tō tēnei taha ki te rātaha. So, you know, he paitira.
And that's where we made our error. Yeah.
Ka pai. No, thank you. Just in terms of the land or assets disposal policy. And not actually aimed at you, Gina, but a comment rather. If you would remember, I was the one that kept asking for that. So I'm a little bit hoha that kare tētahi koro mai kia hau. But that's kei te pai korongo au I te kōrero I nai. So, but I just thought, you know, SPNF and all that stuff. But for me personally, I was the one always asking about that particular policy. And we are a little bit hoa because we didn't get a chance to review it together as we wished to do. However, lesson learnt, hopefully we go forward and get onto that one because that's really important. Kia te arawa, te whenua. Koina te mana o te whenua, te mauri o te whenua is a big deal to us, as you know. Not talking, not like you don't already know that. So, e mihi ana kia tātou, kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Mr. Waru. We'll go to Councillor Kuman. Thank you for your patience, and then finish with Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, my question was exactly almost what fellow Councillor Sandra Kai-Fong had, and I was consulting with Councillor Trevor Maxwell on that. But if I can just delve into something else as well while we're here, and this goes back to what the group mission statement is, and I'm trying to understand because twice I've seen over here the Te Tato board come over here and felt like that they were spoken to, not spoken at or with, and that was one of the submissions, and also in a quite a emotional time, that was when the Maori wards were coming through. So they came up with what the council had told them, but when they came over here, that whole process wasn't. So I'm just wondering, Gina, where do you fit in to bridge this? Because that's what I'm trying to sort of understand. I'm really from the outside of here, but when I feel like sometimes the right hand and the left hand, because it's a partnership, are not agreeing.
I would answer it in this way. Partnership doesn't mean you always agree. It means that you're committed to working through when you disagree. We don't. So there will be times where elected members at this table disagree with each other, when Te Tatau members and elected members disagree. That's the ability to express that disagreement as a healthy sign that people are able to feel able to talk. The challenge for both organisations is to continue to develop ways to work through those disagreements. We're still in quite an early phase. You know, prior to the Te Aroha partnership, there was not a partnership. As an organisation, council, and I would also say probably Te Tatau as well, are still developing the mechanisms for how we engage at an early stage effectively, how we develop our thinking in order to try and bridge gaps. There will still be times, though, when the council takes a different view from Te Tatau. And that's something that you, as elected members, that the Te Tatau representatives need to be thinking about how you talk to each other, how you workshop, how you contribute to that thinking. So there's a role at the management level, but there's also a role at the governance level of people, which, I mean, you all know your role as elected members of talking and trying to find agreement. That's how I would answer that question.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think, yeah, agree to disagree is quite healthy, you know, and it involves robust discussions, but with no disrespect to anybody, from where I see it, it was not speaking to them, it was speaking at them, and that's my take on it.
I don't quite think that's correct, but yeah. Thank you for your opinion on that. There appear to be no other further questions. Sorry, Councillor Maxwell, go on then, make it quick.
Fine. No, I think this is healthy to have this kōrero that we're having, because I was going to ask Gina if, when we do have our feedback discussion on August 11th, I think it is, if you could ensure that we have a report on some of the things that were raised by at the hearings by Te Tātou. It wasn't talked at or wasn't responded because we can't say anything. It kind of surprised me, some of the things that did come up, and so I think what we've talked about now might help with the thinking a bit more, because they do carry a lot of weight with our people out there, and it's important that we get the right. I'd like to know that there is still a strong partnership, and that's important. So if you could provide us a good report on that for that feedback hui on August the 11th, would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And ngā mihi nui ki a koe, Gina, me tō tīma, he wero tino nui ki te work together for all of us. Engari, ko te mea nui, ko te painga mō te kaunihera, te tātou te aroa me te hapori hoki, ngā mihi nui ki a koe. So I just thanked Gina for her work and working together with these discussions, but the most important thing is the work that she's been doing to help bring together the council, Te Tātou Aotearoa, and also the community as we move forward. So thank you very much. We now move to page 33. Oh, sorry, no, page 26, into our district development group, and I'd like to invite our Deputy Chief Executive, JP, to overview his report.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Look, I'd like to take the report as read, but I'd just like to pick up on a couple of areas of emphasis change for us now. Obviously, we've been focusing a huge amount of effort, resourcing and thinking time to meeting our national policy statement on urban development requirements. So that was the housing and business assessment, which was a requirement. And then obviously carrying through that into the statutory deadline for our intensification plan change. For certainly my team and across the council, the amount of work that's had to go into the IAF application has absolutely been huge. So a massive amount of work that's gone into that because we've really needed to know that we've got that alignment between that enabling infrastructure and those plan changes to enable more homes in the district. Parallel to that and earlier than what we're statutorily required to do is we're launching into that review of the spatial plan. So the future development strategy is a critical view now of saying, look, we've taken all those immediate actions that we needed to do, but we actually have to make sure that proactively and in a well-planned manner, we understand what we have to do next, and next and next, as far as greenfields and more importantly, at this stage, industrial commercial land. So the feedback that both Andrew and I from Rotorua NZ are getting is that huge latent demand for business expansion, redevelopment, and I think beneficially to our district, relocation to our space. So Rotorua NZ are leading a lot of the key relationships with currently zoned industrial commercial land to try and make sure we can unlock that. But based on our housing and business assessment, we actually need to zone more. So that will become now our new focus. We've started to address our housing. We can't take the foot off that gas, but we certainly now have to start looking at the business commercial development as well. So the back of my report starts to emphasise the challenges that also exist across our community for recruitment. So we've talked a bit about our own organisation, but there's a significant amount of businesses within our district who are needing staff, needing to expand, and needing land to expand onto. So a really big and important focus for us starting to move forward. I think correspondingly too in that commercial industrial space as we've done the groundwork of reviewing our inner city plans. So we've got our strategic framework in place. So that's the starting point. We've also done a significant amount of work in preliminary engagement around a priority area across the central city, which is also an important stepping stone for us to start saying, how do we start refocusing back into the inner city in that priority area, but also looking at support for business growth and expansion. So probably the other part of the demand for housing and obviously the IAF funding we've signalled in here is that there is a number of development companies that are resourcing up and were resourcing up. So we're talking to them about how they can be sustained through the next few years as challenges continue to face the housing development space. But interesting enough, we're also receiving some quite large firms approaching us to say, actually, how do we get a piece of the IAF investment over the next 5 to 7 years? So really interested in so some very large horizontal infrastructure companies talking about how they might create a footprint here in our district. So really important opportunities for us to see industrial land development, but equally jobs. Which is also critically important to the growth and the sustainability of our community. So that's really the sort of the change in emphasis in my team, whilst we maintain our way through what's going to continue to be planned changes for housing and supporting housing. There's also that greater emphasis on the sustainability of our local economy as well.
Thank you very much, JP. Any questions, Your Worship?
Question, JP, because you're in front of us all, about the resource consents for motels. Where are you at with that? And then when that switch is able to be switched off for some, how are we going with the availability of builds for people to move into?
Kaingaroa has still got a steady pipeline of sites they're developing. I think across the city I've seen a number of sites where they've cleared for intensification or redevelopment of homes. I also know that Darren has signalled that he's got quite a large pipeline over the next couple of years. That's still not enough, and we keep reporting to you that we have always started in quite a deficit of public homes, and they need to put more into our community than they've allocated. We're receiving really supportive statements from Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and Kaingaroa about their emphasis here, which is wonderful. So we need to keep working with them and supporting them to identify sites or potential opportunities and partnerships. So that's critical. As far as the motels are concerned, if you recall, we had proposed to take 9 to court for an enforcement order. That enforcement was to require them to engage consultants, engage with us on a timetable to undertake some consent work for those motels. All of them complied and actually had agreements with consultants and have been engaging with us. You'll be aware that obviously even the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development contracted motels, it takes time to build up a consent application and do the relevant assessment. So those 9 are in that process. I think previously I've reported that we had contacted all of the other motels and advised them that they also needed to start looking at their consenting pathway. My understanding is that 90+% of them have spoken to some consultancy, but like everything else, there is a limit on consulting capacity. So some of them have started work, others are taking longer, and it really does come down to the availability of consultants to support them in that process. But I think at the moment, a number will be looking at what business they want to be in, and that was the intention of us sort of putting those letters out there.
When we listened to the hearings, we heard real estate agents come to say, we've got land available, but, Kaingaroa don't seem to be interested. Will we cover that off in the report back to us for consideration? Because it seemed odd.
No. I think probably the key answer I would have is every decision about purchase or partnership comes down to price and constraints.
Thank you.
And I think somewhere between a landowner and a purchaser/partner for development is a discussion around price and constraints. And so I don't think I need to probably answer off any other questions than that.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Donaldson, followed by Councillor Rokolate, Mr Waru, and then Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, JP. My question's around the Rotorua Racecourse discussion that you've highlighted here. And I wonder if Terry Stevens highlighted that space as a big underutilised space when he visited some years ago. And I just wonder, with the racecourse having a 43 years of lease to run, are they involved in the discussions? Is the mana whenua, who is, I understand, Pukeroa Orowhata, involved in the discussions? And what's the likelihood of anything coming to pass around that? I wonder if you could just enlarge on that.
New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing have kicked off a review of racetracks and racing in the Bay of Plenty. And so they had invited the councils across the Bay of Plenty and obviously the local racecourses to be engaged in that process. Obviously for them, the discussions that were beginning in Tauranga really kicked off the need to have this conversation about what is the future of racing across the Bay of Plenty. And clearly they've been working their way down through the country. They had some discussions in Auckland and some rationalisation, and they were into the Waikato and across obviously to the Bay of Plenty as well. So as far as your specific questions are concerned, New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing reached out to mana whenua and our local racing club. Mana whenua clearly said that wasn't an issue for them at this stage because there was a lease in place, but have expressed some views to New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing. Our local racing club had participated in the initial meeting, but has subsequently withdrawn from those discussions. We've advised our local racecourse in Thoroughbred Racing, the Rotorua Lakes Council, will remain part of the review group that is evaluating potential sites or decisions around racing for the Bay of Plenty. And we think it's important from a city development perspective, and we'd made some initial signals of the longer term view of what could occur on the racecourse through our spatial plan. So we thought it was important to continue to participate in that process.
Thank you. Councillor Okawate.
It's been partly answered just by the question that you've answered there, but I'm not sure with those other councils if the land ownership is with council. I do see Rotorua as being obviously somewhat different because of the lease, existing lease. So are we having different conversations, or are we just going to wait to see what pans out in on the regional level?
I think importantly they understand the tenure issues across all of the racecourses in the Bay of Plenty, and that's certainly being factored into their thinking about what is the medium and long-term future of racing. So at the moment they're exploring and considering a whole bunch of pros, cons and options, so that is part of their conversation, and they do understand the tenure questions that are involved.
Thank you. Mr. Waru.
Tēnā nō koe. Kia ora, JP. Thank you for your report. Yeah. A lot of numbers and figures and all sorts in there, as per normal. However, good to see there's, a rise in building consents and all that kind of stuff, as opposed to compared to the last year gone. Well, I'm just wondering, there's a lot of consents and things that have been given, granted lots, all sorts of like that. How much, how's that been, if you could get a number of actually houses that have been built or places that have been developed, what would that number be? Do you have that information on you?
One of the challenges we've got, and you highlight one of the questions about the proxy measures that we have to use. So you're absolutely right. A consented lot is one piece, but it may be the bulldozers arrive immediately to start undertaking that subdivision, or it may sit there for a number of years. So what we're starting to do is we're trying to pick up the positive drivers here. So we're seeing an increase in lots. There's also over several years a history of lots that have been created. So you end up with a picture of available lots. We're seeing an increase. Similarly, when we get to building consents, there is also a lag between the building consent being issued and potentially a house being built. So the ultimate answer is a code of compliance at the end of it. So you start looking, so we're actually starting to say, look, there's our crude measures of increasing supply. That goes into into an overall pipeline that is realised over time. So what the team are starting to do is analyse how long it takes on average to go from a lot to an actual section, and from a consent to an actual house. So we're starting to get that picture of what's available capacity there to deliver homes, and are we seeing a shift in that over time as well. So these are our sort of lead measures. The lag measures is actually that true conversion rate. So more and more work's going into that space, and also understanding the types of houses. We've talked repeatedly here about the need for smaller homes. So again, we're very much following what's happening with those building consents into the smaller residential housing units as well. So lead indicators, the ultimate back end is how many homes are built through and get through to a code of compliance or final inspection.
Kia ora, JP. I look forward to seeing, the conversion, I suppose, from low to go. It sounds promising. I'm glad you made a comment around the, sort of focusing also on commercial developments and things like that, such as the SPA, IE, the QE, big developments that are happening at the moment. What's the thinking around that, I suppose, that process? Are we looking to make things easier, or a different process, a quicker process to get things through better in a more efficient way? Or, actually, I'll leave it there for now, and then I'll add.
How about, I think we're starting to go just a little bit off topic of the report. We have a number of questions.
Oh, sorry, you talked about that.
Back. So we'll move on now, and I'll let JP give you an update. So we've got Councillor Wang, Councillor Maxwell, Councillor Kumar, and then Mr Hurt, and then we'll take our break. Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, JP, for the report. It's really goes into the detail about a lot of the stuff, a lot of the work that's been going on. The racecourse question I already had answered, but just on the Pukehangi plan, I know that during the submission hearing there was, I recall, I think one person that did raise that apparently council isn't doing anything in terms, there's the land there available, but council isn't doing anything. But obviously we all know with the plan change 2 in the Pukehangi Heights, all that work, the stormwater work needed to go into it, with the IAF and everything else. Are you able to just give like a quick run through or like update on that side of things?
Real quick, you're right. When that plan change was adopted, the conditions on it was that we needed to do a stormwater master plan and a comprehensive design, and right through to stormwater consenting. So we've entered into a partnership with those landowners, and we've been working with a project manager to facilitate a lot of that master planning and detailed design work. We've also involved Rotorua Lakes Trust. We're very keen to see passive stormwater management involved in some of the design thinking in there. So that project is progressing well, but again, we're probably talking at least 6 months more to get to the next stage where we can start talking about resource consenting conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, JP, and I've got about just 2 or 3 quick ones that I'd like to raise from the report. Thorough report, by the way. But I did acknowledge Thomas Collier in his report, but really I should have also acknowledged you. Thank you for the mahi that you did for the stormwater IAF, 85 million. The other question that I had, the other one I have here is down there on the land consents and the building consents. I can recall at the beginning of COVID discussions, are we still practicing the feelings that we had at the time that we want to support relaxing the rules a little for some of the homes and that to be built? You might want to answer that one straight away.
I suppose really quickly that ties to the discussion in the council meeting you're having this afternoon. So council being involved in the medium density residential standards removes the consenting requirements for up to 3 houses, so straight to building consent. So the intention for that piece of legislation or amendment that the government put through was to make it easier and quicker for people to build. And so that's certainly the part of the plan change you're considering this afternoon.
And just a question following on from Deputy Mayor regarding the Rotorua racetrack. Funny, during the hearings we heard a lot of people raising assumptions that we can go and get that, there's this land and that. But a big thing that's not forgotten, the lease doesn't finish till 2065, and then it goes back to Ngāti Whakaue, surely. And then the final question that I have is, during the hearings, I think I know the answer, but anyway, I need to ask it because we're in public. They were in public too. I'm disappointed I wasn't invited to these secret meetings that you've been holding, and you know, why wasn't I invited?
Well, you weren't invited because they didn't happen. So we'll move on now to Councillor
We're
Kumar
in public.
and then Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through the Chair. JP, the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, I believe that was supposed to have been announced on the 21st of July, and the Minister, unfortunately, due to bad weather, could not make it over here. So now all these funds are here, and I believe my particular interest is about the holding ponds at the golf course. Are we going to have a communication? It says over here we are currently discussing these agreements with our development community, and I'm just wondering whether that is part of the community out there, including the golf course?
I think, Councillor, and we've discussed this previously, but in answering it, Stavros, Michael and myself have sat here a number of times and talked about the modelled flood risk from the Mangakakihi and the Utahina streams. And the Regional Council's stark pictures of potential flooding implications if we do not invest in some level of stormwater management, which the catchment management proposals that we've put forward in that IAF were part of. I think probably the other piece that Stavros and I have said is that really we have to set aside the previous conversations we've had about recreation and competing recreation until we know what the stormwater solutions could or should be moving forward. That is the absolute imperative for us. Is to understand the stormwater implications. Now, once we understand the stormwater implications, there is an opportunity then to talk about, well, what recreation fits with that or around that. I think you've specifically asked me the question of what would be the costs if we have to look at other sites, and I've glibly said tens of millions of dollars, because really we've been trying to say if we're thinking about detention areas, we've had to focus on our own reserves and green spaces back up through those stream networks. Otherwise, we've got to start looking at the acquisition of land for detention or retention areas to try and manage stormwater risks. Regan's here and he might be able to provide a better understanding for you, but if you think about our IAF application, a fair bit of the first 2 to 3 years was to do the investigation, which includes things like geotech. So the feasibility, the potential design solution locations before we get to detailed design and before we understand how we can then start investing in those detention retention areas. So other than communicating to our wider communities that we've got a number of sites for investigation, we cannot be more specific about size, physical location, until we've got through some of that initial feasibility and design thinking. So I think that's probably the holding pattern, other than saying the recreation discussions need to be on hold until we understand our stormwater management needs.
Thank you. And then I've got a final question from Mr. Hurd, and if there are any urgent discussion points, I'll open up for that as well before I break.
Thank you, Madam Chair. JP, I acknowledge that you're under huge pressure for housing and finding suitable land for houses. Also acknowledge the good work that's going on there and all the numbers consenting and so forth, heading in the right direction. Good work. But I want to go back, I'm sorry, to Councillor Donaldson's question about the racecourse. Because I do know a little bit about the background. I understand that there's potential for one racecourse in the Greater Bay of Plenty area, that there's only 2 horses in the race for that racecourse, and they are Tauranga and Rotorua, with the possibility of a third option somewhere else being a Greenfields one. Tauranga has already signalled that they are out of the race. They're going to use their racecourse for other purposes, so that leaves us. Are we not allowing a bit of a tiff between the racing club, the Rotorua Racing Club, and ourselves, standing in the way of a combined approach from Ngāti Whakāwi, ourselves and the racing club to be the epicentre with a new AstroTurf racecourse for the Bay of Plenty?
Probably my answer is we're not discounting that. We're a participant at the moment. I think I've signalled that our local racing club is withdrawn from participating in that discussion. And so they've left Thoroughbred Racing New Zealand to consider what are the pros and cons of all the different sites, including greenfield sites across the Bay of Plenty. And I think that's the critical part of it, is they have quite a long shopping list of what they would expect to achieve from a successful site. And you've mentioned one, which is an all-purpose track. So I think that's going to be part of the head-scratching and careful thinking that goes into that review group over the next sort of 6 months or so.
Thank you very much. Well, that concludes our questions. Were there any urgent comments anyone wanted to make before we wrap this up? There appears to be none. Thank you very much, JP. So we will break for 15 minutes now and return at 20 past. We'll return at 20 past 11. Thank you. quorum now. Thank you everyone for your patience as we took a slightly longer break, but we'll get back into our meeting, and we'll start with our Community Wellbeing Group and our Deputy Chief Executive Anaru, and we are on page 33 to page 55 of our agenda. Oh, sorry, do you have a question before?
It's when you open for questions. Thanks.
Oh, yes, sir. Thanks. Over to you, Anaru.
O tēnā tātou. And thank you, Madam Chair. Just an apology, we've got Laura Marshall who's sick today, but we have Tori from her team if there are any questions from the library. If I can please take the report as read, and whilst we've got our team here, just want to talk about some stuff we're going to do to future focus our work as well. So our team, our community wellbeing team, will be meeting next week for some strategy days in order to reset our collective plan, looking at what you expect from us, this council, and then doing some pre-planning into the next council. And we're really going to focus our attention in regards to social cohesion. And I say that in regards to things that we can see right across our community wellbeing space, like the Sir Howard Morrison Centre. I know we're going to talk to that later, and also places like the museum, the aquatic centre, and the Indigenous game, things that connect our people to our place and to our things we see as being really important at this time. That also includes, next week we have the NRL forward planning team here in regards to the Indigenous game. And so we're looking forward to hosting them and showing them our part of the town. So we do have our team here, and I'd like to thank the team for what they've done this calendar year. I've come in February, and must say that, as you can see through the report, that there's lots going on in our place. So look, we're happy and open to take any questions from you at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Donovan, followed by Her Worship the Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And because I understand this is the final O&M meeting of the term, I just want to ask a question around the lakefront. So stunning space. Had a quick walk down there this morning, and coming along amazing. I see from the report that the stage 5 is due to open in September. I'm associated with a couple of events that have their eyes on that amenity space down there, and also any update on where Whakaui tribal lands are at regarding the commercial development. That's my question. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Kia ora, and good morning, good afternoon, good morning still, elected members. So the stage 5 is actually going to open a little bit earlier. So next week they'll be applying for practical completion. So we're looking to have probably a relatively small karakia the week after, like we did for the Memorial Plaza car park, and open that up to the public. So I was down there last night having a look at it, and it's looking fantastic. And with respect to the commercial development, that definitely is progressing. There are discussions underway at the moment, and I believe there'll be a paper coming around that to SPNF later this month.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as I said earlier, this is the last O&M, so I'd just like to take the opportunity to acknowledge what a fantastic piece of work that project has been, so well managed, and I get bouquets from all over the country regarding that space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donaldson. We've got Her Worship the Mayor, then Councillor Kumar.
Yes, and me too. So to say thank you. This is a fantastic project, and for us it was trying to show that we are a city built on a lake, and actually I'm dying for that last bit of mesh to come down, so that we really do feel the linkages with the end of Tūtanakai Street and just opening into the lakefront. And it is beautiful. And I can't believe there is very little damage being done to any of the trees and any of the plantings. So it's obviously a very valued space, and thank you for that. My question is one of, I think, several councillors expressing concern about our young kids. It's the wellbeing side of your mahi. No one is blaming us, but how do we engage Anaru to stop some of the behaviour that is so distressing to those out in the suburbs? We're all at a bit of a loss for how you manage that behaviour that's so manifest and distressing.
Yes, look, it's, thank you, Mayor Chadwick. It's a challenge. Certainly, there are things that we can do together in regards to children's action plans and within our space, the child equity work. My suggestion, obviously, I'm aware that some of the councillors have been on youth councils as well. I think there's an opportunity for us to wānanga what our place looks like together, would be my suggestion, thinking about some of the challenges that we know our communities are facing with the long tail of socioeconomic impact of COVID. And if I think about in the community safety space, what we're doing there, very encouraged by the crime science that we're applying, very encouraged by the fact that if we have large concentration of people, that we are in the right place at the right time. So there's probably a couple of parts to that about how we keep our communities safe, but also how we engage our rangatahi. So I'd actually be really open to those from the council who have interest in that space for us to do some stuff together, because it's a tricky situation that you're talking to in regards to our young people, but they are our future leaders.
Thank you.
I could just add there, I do believe it is that youth court sort of restorative justice approach and turning these kids around that way. They all don't want to be naughty. They want to have an optimistic future. And that's the sort of thing that you want to see. I went to boys' high, girls' high play the other night, and through kapahaka, those kids are now involved in song and performance, and the level of participation in there and the pride of the whole school, both schools. I mean, it's right throughout our colleges, but it's how do we capture that thinking that actually staircases those in trouble to become more positive, to contribute to the town. I think there's a lot of work that we need to do there.
Absolutely, Mayor Chadwick, and we'll pick that up in our child equity space, but certainly open to other suggestions from the council here as well.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair, thank you. Good morning, Anaru, still. My question is around the value of grant and support, and I know criteria have been met because it's for them to, but in a time where community safety and well-being is very important to us, I see we only give neighbourhood support Rotorua Incorporation $8,000. And now, when we're talking about the well-being and safety of the community which it serves, we give Rotorua Citizens Advice Bureau $40,000. We have applications for Miss Rotorua Foundation for $20,000. How does it sit with where we want our communities to lie in terms of safety?
There's a series of different parts of our funding policy, some of which are for partnerships, some are for smaller community groups, and they're meant to be sustained things which give them certainty. And then we've got things which are more grassroots, project, opportunistic things which come along for just as they come along over the year. So the policy tries to address different kinds of needs and different kinds of opportunities, and there's never enough money to go around all the groups we'd like to support. So when people put in applications, their application has to meet certain criteria, and then the panel, which is actually an elected member panel, who decides those grants, looks at those criteria and the quality of the applications and so on in front of them to make those decisions. I guess from a community safety perspective,
it's not just the direct community safety that groups contribute to, it's also the resilient, connected community and the prevention aspects of people being connected. So there's lots of ways in which different groups actually contribute to community safety.
And Councillor Kumar, specifically to Neighbourhood Support Group, and acknowledging you here, Aroha as the chair, is having the opportunity to speak to Neighbourhood Support Group at the AGM recently. Become very clear to me, and I know that we've had these conversations with Ms. Bray, is that the opportunity to reset in that space together so that we can be very clear about our priorities together as a community would be really useful, and us working alongside police, alongside neighbourhood support groups to really encourage the participation of neighbours. I'm a fan in regards to the groups like neighbourhood support groups. I think really important to have eyes and ears within our communities. I think there's an opportunity for us to do some more work together in that space, specifically.
Thank you. Councillor Kawate.
Yes, thank you. Kia ora, Anaru. I did hear Her Worship talking about the young people and the issues that we often have in the community that arise from their behaviour. However, I have to say that it is not usually young people that are offending in the area of domestic violence, sexual assault, criminal, violent offending, receiving stolen goods, and child abuse. That's adults. That's adult offending. So I want to ask you, in terms of our role, council role, and the leadership that we could take in trying to develop some solutions there, are we meeting, or are you meeting specifically, with the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Health, MOH, MOE, and some of our significant providers, health providers and others, to see and hear from them what the challenges are, and if we can be instrumental in lending our voice to assisting them, because they play a pivotal role, and it's certainly heavy duty, that area of work. And I take what the Mayor is saying. We heard it in the hearings the other day. We heard it. People are concerned. They're scared. Many of them, I might add, are concerned before the unwashed, the so-called unwashed, and whoever they believe that is, come to their communities. And I'm talking about the concern that was raised about people who are currently in motels, and people are concerned that they're going to be coming into their areas. Well, we've got a significant crime in our community anyway. So all I'm just saying is that there's anxiety already because people think of what the people living in the motels are going to be up to if they get homes in other areas. But there's already concern. So I'm just asking if we can do anything.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Rotorua. If I talk specifically to family harm, when I was the area commander here, we utilised the collective impact approach to mitigate those potential silos that you're talking about in the leadership space, because it is an all-of-government response alongside us and with your leadership that is required. So in my view, we've got some challenges there, but that also creates an opportunity across the all-of-government space. We are working closely with Ezra Schuster in his role as the Regional Commissioner for the Public Service. And we have some recent examples. I think about housing, and I know we're going to talk to some of that later today, whereby the all-of-government approach has been, we've been able to bring people together to have conversations around some of those challenges. I think as we move forward, the more formalisation of those leadership groups to understand the issues and opportunities of our place, with your guidance and support, would be advantageous. Whilst there's pockets of excellence and there are relationships formed, I still think that there is siloing.
Thank you. We've got a question from Mr. Waru and then Councillor Maxwell.
Tēnā koe, Anaru, tēnā koe. Tēnā koe tēnei reporter. You have a huge portfolio. Hoi no, kia tīmata ke waka kōrero ki te mihi. Been going into the library a lot lately, taking my baby in there too for her checkups and naharane. Beautiful. Every time I've been in there, there's been kids and and just this full and this cool vibe in there. And, you know, I wasn't really a library fan, if you get my drift. I ngā rā unga, hoi anō, ko tino ki te au te hua, so he mihi ki te whare puka puka. Are there any plans to have, you know, I'm always asking for more, but, you know, more, you know, utilising that space more?
Kia ora. Yeah, there is. We've got a big long-term plan coming up this year for the annual plan and what we're going to do. So we're going to be doing a bit of a refresh for the building and what we use it for and making sure that it's what our community needs. So we're just looking through that at the moment.
Ka wai, I'm down with that, karawe, because it's a beautiful space and, yeah, cool vibe. The other thing I wanted to talk about too also was, I know there are a number of events coming in, so he mihi tēnei ki tō tīma, with all those events coming in. Tauniru, kei te pahe mihi noa ho tēnei. And also on the issue of safety, with the uplifted number of ram raids lately, Rotorua, Anaru, with your background also in law enforcement as well, is there any levers that council can sort of pull on to, I don't know, help those particular ones who are getting targeted over and over and over again? Like, I don't know, putting some bollards in or something.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Mr. Waru. Certainly, if we apply the crime prevention through environmental design work, there are some things that we can do collectively with those shop owners, but also alongside our police in the prevention response and opportunity. It potentially comes back to your point too, Councillor Kumar, around neighbourhood support groups, but also having eyes and ears in the community. So, and the potential around CCTV as an opportunity, also around different types of patrolling and what that looks like, and the more connections that we have. Even thinking, Mr. Hurd, to, you know, the business community as how we all connect in together to create that safe space, safe public places together. So there is some work that can be done there. Certainly, we'll take some stuff offline. Again, I'd have to have a conversation with our police colleagues to see what's happening in the national setting space as well.
Thank you.
Tēnā koe he, mihi nui tēnei ki tō rōpu whakahaere, he rawi ngā mahi. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Maxwell, Councillor Wang, Councillor Yates, and then Councillor Donaldson, and we'll move on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tuatahi tautoko te kōrero rāwiri o tō mahi. Thank you for a thorough report and very pleasing to the eye too. And continue with the format, having the photographs and that in there as well. It's like a photo says more than 1,000 words. And I'd like to ask 1,000 questions, but no, I'll just ask one. And that's regarding the Te Aka Māori hosting the two events with the Kupu Writers Festival that went on for a whole week. It was a week of atrocious weather, but that whole Writers Festival was brilliant. I heard it was the first one, inaugural, and they're coming back even stronger next year. But it was a brilliant event, and and I know that many of our staff were involved, but I'll let Wahine explain that. But yeah, tautoko, kei te mihi.
Kia ora, yes, so we had the Kupu Festival, so we had two events run with Rangitihi leading them from our Te Aka Māori team. We had really good turnout, especially for our Saturday one with our panel of speakers there. So hopefully, well, they've said that they'll come back next year.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Anaru, and to the whole team. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, being the last Operations and Monitoring Committee meeting, I really, really appreciate all the work that your team does. It is a very extensive portfolio that you have, and we see it through the reports, but there are so many positive stories that come through from all the work that you guys are doing out there in the community, at the grassroots, from our rangatahi to our elderly. You can see a lot of the great stuff that's happening there. So I really wanted to commend the whole team and thank the whole team for that as well. And just on the community safety issue as well, just one point about the funding. I really was really honoured to be on the community grants and the partnership agreement funding committees, and just to assure you that the community safety aspect was really looked into as well. One of the key points in the LTP, and it was one of our key focuses, and that was shown with the funding towards the community patrol. But my question was just around, it might be a little bit controversial, it probably will be directed towards Kurt, but it was just around, I was approached by some people about whether or not Rotorua Lakes Council has ever thought of or could potentially be looking at, especially with our bylaw reviews, around the regulation of cats, and whether that would be like what Palmerston North City Council did in 2018, bringing in mandatory microchipping, desexing, and even potentially a cat limit per household. And whether or not Rotorua Lakes Council has ever looked at that, or whether or not it could potentially be something we look at in the future, because we all know the damage feral cats and pests do to our native species, but domestic cats also contribute quite a large part in that. And so, yes, I'll just put that question to you.
Morena, and thank you for the question, Councillor Wang. So certainly it is an interesting subject, and it is one that we do see pop up nationally from time to time. And it is something that Council does get calls about. To date, there has not been really any sort of national guidance around it, and it has been left up to individual areas to take an approach that's appropriate for their area. So I guess the answer to your question would be it is certainly something that is worth further discussion at some point about what's appropriate for our district.
Thank you.
Councillor Wang, we'll take that offline and we'll come back to you with some of our findings. Might we also take the opportunity, because we're speaking about cats, to talk about dogs? Just because Kurt is here, and you know, my young Coco Chanel would want us to talk about dogs as well, and we do have an update about dogs that we'd like to share with you now as well. So thank you for that interlude.
Thanks, Andrew. So you may have picked up in this latest report is that we did experience a downturn in the number of dog registrations. To give you a little bit of comfort, that is not unique to us. We have made some inquiries with some of our neighbouring councils who have also experienced a downturn as well. Last year we didn't have the same thing, but something has changed this time around. Typically, we would be applying a penalty for late registration as of today. We have just been completing our wrap-up of exactly where the figures sit, and it is somewhere between 10 to 15% down on what we would normally have at this time of year. So what we are wanting to do in that space is to pause on any penalties applied to the community, being fair and reasonable in that space, to let us understand what is happening here and come up with something appropriate in that space. So there will be some comms going out very shortly to make sure that people are aware that that has been paused until we can give some further information on the solution to that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Yates and then Councillor Donaldson, and we'll wrap up.
Through you, Madam Chair, o tira kia koutou. Kei te tika, I think everyone's acknowledged the extensiveness of this team, but it is, as has everyone mentioned, also our last O&M. So as lead of art and culture, ka nui te mihi kia koutou katoa. Yet again, another fabulous report. demonstrating the strengths that we have in Rotorua across Te Arawa within our arts and culture space. So nei rā te mihi kaua atu kia koutou. I'm looking forward to seeing so many of these other projects come either start or come to completion, as is the lakefront nearing that. My question is, possibly to Stuart, how are we tracking with the Sir Howard Morrison Centre, and have we got a date yet on opening? Seeing as it is our last O&M hui, please.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Yes, we are on track. So practical completion of the heritage part of the project is next week. From there, we'll be inserting or installing all our theatre services. That'll take about 3 months. We're planning to open the facility as a soft opening in November with the ARIA on November the 19th. And that gives us an opportunity for the technical team to iron out any bugs that we may have in the systems. And then with a formal opening in February next year, and that's scheduled for the 16th, 17th and 18th of February.
It's going to be very exciting. Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is around crime and antisocial behaviour as well. So looking at page 51 and the small community grants, and you know that to me spells out the real fabric of good in our society. So much crime and antisocial behaviour these days, if you talk to teachers, is driven by social media, TikTok challenges, the like. Even adults don't behave on social media, I'm afraid, but with kids, you know, are we better to be focusing our energies into supporting positive groups like Wakaama, like ATC, groups like that who are getting kids into positive behaviour than trying to be the ambulance at the bottom of a cliff in respect of community safety?
Yes, Councillor Donaldson, I think, you know, we could all say a kid in sport is a kid out of court. We've all heard that. We fund a variety of sporting, arts and culture, non-for-profit social organisations so that we are supporting the wide breadth of interests for our rangatahi tamariki whānau. The way in which we deliver our community grants, there could be a bit of flexibility in that space. So again, just taking the learnings, listening to the community, looking at the reporting that they're giving us, and really listening to the trends, the issues, the concerns that they may have or be seeing. And then I guess in putting that into practice, it's having a look at that kind of voice around the child equity table. We now have a person within our team that is looking at that rangatahi space. But it definitely is a concern. We're all hearing the same messaging. The way in which council responds to that at this point has been around the relationships with those communities and the funding we provide. Kia ora.
I think also, Councillor Donaldson, it's similar things like for Crankworks as an example, is the rangatahi type activations. It's similar, we're seeing those opportunities with Wakaama, as you've mentioned, and I think from what I'm hearing, we've got an opportunity here to utilise sport as a vehicle, and certainly we'll work within our team and we'll be able to come back to yourself and the new council as to what that looks like.
Thank you. We had a question from Mr. Waru.
Just a very quick question. Thank you for your indulgence. Anaru, or it might have been for Stuart actually, about the Howard Morrison Centre. Has there been any thought into the launch and the kinds of things that we want to do for the launch when it opens?
Yes, we have. And so there's a couple of things. Obviously, the first one will be the official blessing. And we've been working with the Paiara Taki on that event. That'll obviously happen in November before the ARIA. And then the main event on the 16th, 17th, 18th of February, we're looking at, on the first 2 days, a gala type event in terms of bringing the very best of what Rotorua has to offer in terms of performing arts. And so we're in discussions with many of those artists at the moment, and also around availability of people like Cliff Curtis and Taika and those alike, if they're going to be here in town, to try and get them along to the opening. On the Saturday, we're planning a public open day. So we'll have some activities, probably some kid shows in the concert chamber, and giving the public an opportunity to reconnect with the place, but also have a look at the changes and what the facility will offer the community moving forward.
Thank you very much. Awesome. Can't wait. Amihi.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our questions for the Community Wellbeing Group, but I think you've heard quite a bit from the table and elected members just how grateful and thankful we are for the very big team that is out there in our community at the grassroots, providing excellent services and greater wellbeing for our community. So thank you very much for the work that you all do and have done this term. Kia ora. We now move to page 55, our Infrastructure and Environmental Solutions Group, and we've got Director Regan Fraser here to present to us.
Morena tātou katoa. I'll largely take the report as read today, and what I wanted to just go over quickly was I was having some reflections on stormwater earlier today, so I jotted some notes and then JP covered off most of them during his talk. But I thought it would be worth going over it again just quickly here, just for some clarity for the community, because there's a lot being talked about at the moment. So this year, compared to the last couple, we've seen a number of high-impact rainfall events. We've got a community that now is expecting a better level of service than what we've traditionally delivered and what our infrastructure is capable of. We live in a bowl. The water's got one way down once it's at the sides, and it's going to come down to that great big beautiful puddle we've got in the middle. But because of that, it constrains our growth. When we develop now, we need to make sure as we develop, we're developing in a way that we're not going to cause any issues for anyone else downstream. But that gets complicated. Solutions take up developable land, and as a developer we've seen frustrations around what do we have to do, how do we get it there. And then on top of that, of course, climate change is predicted to increase the frequency and severity of the events that we're going to experience. And then very soberingly, as JP mentioned, we had a report by the Toi Moana Regional Council on what does 2130 look like with climate change applied if we don't do anything, and very sobering, as I mentioned. So what are we as a council doing? This work started, it's been going on forever really, but earnestly 3 years ago we started what we called Stormwater Master Planning. It's not a statutory document like our infrastructure strategy and asset management planning, but we thought it was the time to get in and actually really set out what is the future, what are we going to have to do? And that does inform the infrastructure strategy. It identified what should we mitigate in the general area that could potentially be used to mitigate it. Now, quite fortuitously, the government started having some money available that we could apply for. And that stormwater master planning has really stood us in excellent stead, because when we are applied, we're not going, oh, we know we've got an issue and we think this will do it. We've actually got some facts and numbers which we were able to put in to go with it. And because of that, we've had a phenomenal amount of investment by our government. 7 million for the west side from DIA, from the fund that we got for agreeing to share information with the MOU. 15 million from Crown Infrastructure Projects for east side, for detention, dams and conveyance. And just recently, as talked about a number of times already, just under 85 million from the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund. Now, I don't mean to make it sound very easy, especially that IAF. It was a $1 billion fund, and we ended up with just under 85 million, which is a phenomenal share for our district. It wasn't easy, so there's been a number of people involved throughout this process. It's taken a long time, probably half of JP's team, certainly a lot of infrastructure. And there's been a lot of going back and forth. Kāinga Ora is ministering that fund. They came back with a lot of questions. There were a lot of meetings. So you should be very proud of the team to be able to get this fantastic outcome. So what does it mean? It means that we've now got the pūtea to do works to enable growth in an accelerated fashion. What we were previously going to do over 30 years, we're now going to try and do it over 7. That'll mean that development is much easier. And that was probably primarily delivered or what's happened because of the need for housing. But what it also does is help with the issues we've got already. So we've got some certain problem areas around the district. It allows us to divert, detain and convey in an appropriate manner where it's not going to scour the environment. Master planning, however, doesn't give you a confirmed spot on what it looks like right now. Master planning gives you a suggested area where a solution could present. And so there's a lot of talk in the community around what are the next steps. And we are going to be working on some communication to go to the community. But it's not going to tell them what it is. We're going to tell them how the process works. And just to share today, if I pick one in particular, Springfield, because it's being talked about a lot, the next step is feasibility. So does what we thought work? Can the ground hold it? Will the solution do what we need it to do in order to mitigate the stormwater? For Springfield in particular, the feasibility work will start in 2024 and will take that year. In 2025, should that determine that that site is good and we can have a solution, that'll mean we need to design it. And we'll be coming back to this council with that design contract. After that, once designed, construction for that particular area will be 2026 to 2027. Once again, we'll be coming back with that contract for that construction. So I just want to share with you and the community, there's a number of points we've got to go through before we actually get somewhere, and this council will get to review at those points. And as JP mentioned maybe a couple of weeks ago, a golf course and a stormwater detention dam are not mutually exclusive. So our goal, if that site is feasible, is to have a stormwater solution there that enables that land use to continue. A stormwater dam sounds like a great big pond of water, but the reality is the majority of the time it's dry. It's there to be used when we've got these large rainfall events to stop the downstream issues. That was, really what I wanted to get across today, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Regan. Your Worship, the Mayor, followed by Councillor Donaldson and Councillor Yates.
And this is a question. Also, thanks for mentioning Springfield and where that's at. The other inquiry that we're often fielding is the AMP showgrounds. Have we got further forward with a solution there that is linked to Nongataha and their flood risks?
Through the Chair, so my understanding was that they're still currently working with landowners out there in order to enable that solution. Not yet had an update from Regional Council further on that.
Could I just ask that there be some urgency to that update with Regional Council, because those dwellers in the entire neighbourhood really concerned at the heavy rain events we've had and just still a bit unsure where things are at there? Thanks, Regan.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and pardon my cynicism through you, Regan, but we're very aspirational about accelerating infrastructure for housing. And I look at page 62 and, we need consents for all of the stormwater infrastructure that's to be put in place. But here we have consents, and a question was asked about this by the Chair of Regional Council himself in a recent hui of the strategy group. Consent for the bridging consent was lodged in January 2021 to allow us to continue to spray in the forest. My understanding is that's not yet issued. We lodged a consent for the upgrade of the wastewater treatment plant a year ago yesterday, and that's still not approved and still asking for further information. And we're yet to work with Mana Whenua Iwi to lead the way, as Gina put in her report, for a sustainable forest discharge approach. So how confident are you that we can get consents processed through Regional Council in a timely fashion to enable this wall of work to be done to accelerate our infrastructure to enable housing? That's my question.
Through the chair, I guess there's two parts to that. One is specifically for these consents that I'm talking about with the IF, we've included in the time framing what we think we need at the moment in the current market that we're in. The other consents which are ongoing, such as the bridging consent, the Morris Street Dam consenting, Regional Council is involved at an officer level with those, so they're very well aware of what's going on, but we are starting to ramp up the pressure as well. It does become a bit of, I can't tell them what to do, but all we can do is show them just how important this is, work with them throughout the project so that they're aware when it's coming to land, so that they can plan their resources. Because they're looking after this community as well, and so they want to see the same outcomes. So the greater clarity that we can give them when the work's coming up, they can work with us.
Very well answered, thank you. Councillor Yates, followed by Mr Waru.
Pai, through you, Madam Chair, nei rā te mihi ki a koe, Regan. My question comes from page 65, and I might lump two part questions into one. So I notice in the refuse collection that there's the bin replacement there of 233, which was kind of a little bit, I was quite surprised by the number of that. So do you know what the common response for replacement is? And who covers the cost for that? Does it come back on the ratepayer or the individual homeowner, or does council cover that?
Through the chair, I guess the question is, why does the bin need to be replaced? Sometimes the bin has been completely overloaded and it's smashed as it's collected. Sometimes the bin has been stolen, and sometimes the bins have not been constructed well. And so the answer is different for all of those. We do have a warranty on the bins. If they've not been constructed to the way that they need to be, then they are replaced, not at council's cost. Should the bin have been overloaded, typically we will cover it because the evidence of proof becomes a bit hard, but we do track patterns. And so then we have a cordial with the individual owners around the correct usage of the bin and going forward from there. But I would note, we've got, I think it's nearly 70,000 different bins out there at any time, so 200 can sound like a lot over a month, but...
Thank you. Mr Waru, followed by Councillor Kumar and then Councillor Maxwell.
Tēnā koe te tia mana. Kia ora Regan. Nice to see you, bro. Kai te mihi atu ki a koe. And while we were talking about rubbish there, if you could you say, give a big tēnā koe or tēnā koutou to your kaimahi up at the transfer station at Parekarangi, because they're awesome. I've done a bit of cleaning up over the past few months and they've been great. So, tērā. Talking about the stormwater issues. Have you or your team been around to see what's happening in other places in terms of that? Because I'm working on a big one over in Tauranga at the moment. But, just to get a feel of what kind of solutions could work here for us.
Through the chair, so primarily with our master planning, we've been working with the consultants, Tonkin and Taylor, who are nationwide experts who've done a phenomenal amount of work here locally. We are a little bit different. As Her Worship mentioned before, we live in a lake, and it used to be a much larger lake, and we've got some unique geological constraints as well as geothermal constraints. But Tonkin and Taylor have done a lot of work here, but plus also it's drawing on the expertise, and they do have internal large-scale stormwater detention dams experts to make sure that we're getting exactly what we need here.
And I know I always bring this kind of thing up, but I just want to sort of put on the table, not to discount ngā mātauranga Māori when it comes to those things, because I've worked on a few projects, similar ones, big ones, and found some really good solutions within ngā mātauranga Māori. So just wanted to put that out there. Lastly was you mentioned 30 years of mahi. Now you want to squeeze it all into 7 years of mahi. That's big. Do you think the capacity is here to be able to do that, and realistically?
If I can just quickly touch off on your other point around Mātauranga Māori as well, I do want to assure you that the way things used to be done aren't the way they're done here anymore. If I pick one project in particular, the Morey Street Dam, we've been working with local mana whenua from the start on this process, taking them through the whole lot. So gone are the days of, hey, we've gone and done this thing, what do you think? It's involved at the start, going through the process to incorporate that Mātauranga as well. And we learn a lot as well, it's fantastic. Sorry, I've gone completely blank on
30 years, 7 years,
Thank you.
can we do it?
Cool. So the good news is, as I mentioned, that the planning and the involvement of consultants already, we're not just starting this project now. So we've engaged with Tonkin and Taylor to make sure that they have the resource available for our first stages, which includes the feasibility and then, if we're in the right space, detailed design. I'd say we're also quite advanced. You know, we have almost a unique reputation as this council on delivering on the money that the government gives us. And so while this IAF fund may go out wider, I believe we're in a much better position to be more advanced on the planning, that when it comes time to engage the resource, that we've got enough time to scoop that up.
Thank you, Regan. Tēnā tātou.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair, thank you, Regan. Regan, just wondering if you could answer regarding rural road seal extensions. Are we doing it per budget on a quota, or are we sealing it on kilometres?
Thank you. So there's a policy which is based on dollars, and it's an annual sum. This particular year, due to constraints in the market, we weren't able to complete all we wanted to, but we have confirmed we are able, it's not use it or lose it. So we are bringing that money over to be able to complete the works next year, or this financial year now.
Thank you. And final question from Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. Kia ora, Regan. Living in Rotorua's first settlement, Ohenamutu, the question I have is, can you just expand a little on the empty tub that might be at Springfield, fix the Utahena, and then down to the resort of Ohenamutu? Just expanding on that one a bit more.
So the basic premise of a detention dam is to be able to hold peak flows. Instead of all the water running down all at the same time and causing issues, scouring out, flooding, is to be able to hold back a certain amount that you need. And the way we do that is we run some modelling on, you know, what does a 1 in 100 year storm look like, and what does that look like in 100 years once we've added what we think climate change is going to do to it? How much water do we need to hold back from the rivers to stop the type of flooding that we need to happen? And so that's how we come to the size that we need. It's horrifically complicated. It can take 7 days to run one of those models. There's a whole heap of maths and science in it. But I will point out, you can never build something to protect something from anything. You know, make something storm-proof, they'll make a better storm. So what we're trying to do is prevent from happening what will reasonably happen in 100 years by looking for solutions of either conveying more efficiently or holding back and slowly letting it away in an appropriate manner to protect life and property. Correct. There's a couple of different solutions there. One is holding water back. The other is diverting water that may have gone there somewhere else. So it's an integrated type of plan.
Thank you very much. Were there any urgent points of discussion or comments before we wrap up? Your Worship.
Well done to the team. Phenomenal announcement. And we know it was the culmination of years of work, really. And we were incredibly proud to hear it at local government too, at the conference. But well done, team. It is a great platform for a new council.
And I just want to say thank you, Regan. I appreciate the korero around the Mātauranga Māori. Tēnā koe.
Yes, and thank you very much, Regan. We appreciate you coming to present to us and some exceptionally well answers to our questions. Thank you very much. Now we are going to move into our recommendation disposal of surplus property. I do not wish to rush us, but just a reminder, we do have a council meeting at 1 o'clock, so we want to make sure you get in a bit of a lunch break before then. So we'll keep our next questions for the last two agenda items brief, please. But I would now like to hand over to JP. I ask for a mover and a seconder to receive the report disposal of surplus land at 283 Clayton Road be received. Move to worship, seconded Councillor Donaldson. All those in favour, please say aye.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just and before I hand across to Steph to talk specifically about this property, as you're aware, we've talked to you before about our long list of properties that we were considering for disposal, and obviously I gave you an update at a previous O&M meeting which signalled that we were still working on this property, but also highlighted the current states of progress around Te Tauki as well. So that's been made public around that resolution as well, and the difficulties Kaingaora are having with identifying that as a potential site for development. So this one is a little more straightforward, and I'll just hand across now to Steph to guide you through this report.
Thank you, and Morena, good afternoon, through you, Madam Chair. The purpose of the report today is to seek your recommendation to Council to firstly declare this land surplus and then dispose of it. You'll see the map above. This property has been in Council's ownership since the 1950s when it was vested as part of a subdivision. It was originally a reserve, the classification of which was revoked by the Council at the time in the 1980s, recognising that it isn't a very good reserve. The back part, or the northern part of the reserve, is quite steep, leading up to those properties on Mountain Road. The intention at that time was to dispose of it, but it is our understanding that that was put on hold due to complaints from the neighbours. We commenced a subdivision process of this site in 2019 to subdivide it into 5 lots, with the intention being at that time to dispose of those lots individually. Since then, and particularly with the imminent introduction of the MDRS provisions, we think we could get a much better development outcome of the site. It is a difficult site due to some of the topography and the unusual shape, and therefore we're proposing to seek to dispose of the site through an expressions of interest process to make sure we can get it comprehensively developed using best practice urban design principles and also getting the best value, I guess, for the property. That's pretty much summarises it, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Were there any questions? Mr. Waru, followed by Councillor Kaifong.
This take again. Te tau o te arawa, as long as, we should be advising or at least pushing you in the right direction where to go in terms of any disposal of whenua. Whenua, nui te mana o te whenua, te mauri o te whenua kia te arawa. And so I would hope, because I haven't seen that policy yet, that there's something in there that says mana whenua, te mana o te whenua will get first dibs, at least, first right to have a go at getting any whenua that the council disposes of. And so I'd like to think that that's in their policy, but like I said, I don't know, I haven't seen it. Has there been any thought? It concerns me at the point 6 here. As the land is freehold and not reserved, there is no further requirement for council to consult on the disposal of this land. Karau te whakaiki tēnā. And that's the position of Te Tatau as well. So it's not having to go at anyone personally here, but yeah, sorry, I don't, unless I get some assurances around the process where it's going to be, how it's going to be disposed of, well, then karau te whakai. Kia ora.
Thank you, and I'll hand over to Thomas to answer that for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a reminder, councillors, that the policy in question was adopted back in 2017. It was done in conjunction with Te Tato. And at that time, the Te Tato members did actually raise the same question with myself when we workshopped with them. And as we explained to them at that time, that we weren't actually legally able to do that request, and that was understood at that time. So I'm not sure the legal parameters have changed that would allow us to do that at this moment. But the policy itself went through consultation, adoption, and hasn't changed since 2017.
And perhaps just a question to follow up on that, either through JP or Gina, just to confirm that this land, there isn't a current interest or ownership or previous ownership of mana whenua that we're aware of. I know there's usually a process where we go through that just to double check.
Yeah.
We did undertake a land status report on the site. I would probably make the assumption that at some point in time it was Māori land, but we acquired it through subdivision and there is no current claim on it from any hapu iwi group.
Okay, thank you.
Just make a point of clarity, point of clarification rather. That's not my point. My point was, you know...
Oh, sorry, that was just a follow-up question that I asked.
Yeah. Oh, no, not you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to be clear on that. Yes, I rongo ngā kōrero Thomas, and yes, that was put forward, and well, that we didn't see if the properties in question were going and were asking for market rates. There wasn't an issue. There wasn't an issue. We just thought, as a courtesy and as a partner, ki tēnei whenua, ki tēnei mana o te whenua, that we would get first dibs at it because we've lost so much already. Nā reira, koina roa tāku. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask Gina to just provide an answer to this and then we'll move on.
The policy does not provide for a right of first refusal. So just to be clear, no, it doesn't provide for that. In terms of, there are, however, some instances where a right of first refusal does exist, particularly in terms of gifted reserves, for example. So if reserve status is revoked from those reserves, it is returned to Ngāti Whakaiwi. But outside of that, that hasn't been either a feature of treaty settlement negotiations to date, recognising that not all of the settlements have been completed, and it's also not a feature of the policy as it currently stands.
Thank you. And just as a final note, I do want to note that part of the recommendation is for it to go out for expressions of interest, of which any party can express their interest. So I now have Councillor Kai Fong and then Councillor Raukawa-Tate.
Thank you, Chair. My question was just around the criteria with the weighting. And so obviously the sale of the property would be for housing. And does the scheme plan say that we're looking at social housing or we're just housing full stop? And so therefore the weighting there of only 30%?
We have not been specific with the typology of housing, and the intention would be to, I guess, review that when those expressions of interest came in. But regardless of whether it was social housing or market or any combination in between, the expectation would be that it's developed comprehensively using best urban design principles, hence the requirement to provide the scheme plan.
And just a second question is, so would there be a timeline also, because we say we've got a housing crisis, so we need the land developed ASAP, so would there be terms and conditions or penalties imposed upon the developer to ensure that the development was undertaken in a timely fashion, that they weren't just going to land bank?
Yes, you will see we have included a specific criteria around development timeline, and we would have an expectation that that's done as quickly as possible. The reason we haven't been explicit in that is because there is, I guess, some unknowns in terms of supplies and product and the industry, a bit of unknown in the industry at the moment. So I guess the ability to lock somebody into that, JP.
Yeah, and I think it reflects on what the proposal comes back as in this situation. So the timeline is a factor. I think I indicated I don't know if I did indicate, but one of the things is you can see from this lot, there's 5 sections which actually, when the property team did do the subdivision, they had to work around also the site constraints of the slope, but equally our infrastructure that goes across the site. So that would be one of the things that actually, depending on what their comprehensive design looked like, there might be actual implications on the timing of the project if it started to include some of our own infrastructure. So we'd left it as a weighted criteria, but we hadn't gone so far as to say it must be done within X amount of time, which then would have created a reset of the potential design outcomes we might have seen.
I suppose the question that I was asking around that was because we've got the revocation of the reserves, which have got some quite specific terms and conditions that are still to be decided upon, which are the issue of timely building, and so whether or not we're making some distinction when this is a disposal of more council land, although not reserve land, but just ensuring that if we are disposing of land, that we are getting the outcome of quick building of housing. Thanks.
I would just go further, and I think Steph did touch on it there. Because of the nature of the site, we're trying to get some good outcomes and actually leave some flexibility on the table for someone to come back with a scheme plan, which is a constrained site, and that's why I think we've probably been more flexible in that weighting of the criteria and waiting to see what kind of proposals we might get back if it wasn't a site that was easily accessed, flat or something like that. So there are some challenges here that we're just trying to keep some flexibility for those who might put forward an expression of interest.
Thank you. Councillor Rotorua.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to come back to a question that Mr Waru raised, and it's around obviously around perhaps the right of refusal for land. And I do recall, Mr Waru, you were like a cracked record for many months actually, trying to look at the policy around the disposal of surplus properties. So, but it is correct, isn't it, that, this one was done, the policy was developed in 2017, well, actually reviewed probably, and we review our policies on a regular basis, so I presume after 5 years, at some stage it could be reviewed again. Because I don't think, if I remember correctly, there was really no appetite at that stage to look into this really well. And I think that there is an opportunity at some stage for the policy to be reviewed. Is that correct?
Through Madam Chair, yes, there is. This is a decision that you would make as a council or request officers to consider a review of that policy sooner. And obviously it sits within Thomas's area for the property space, and it does appear, as Gina has mentioned, an area of tension in the partnership and something that the council may need to make a decision on about whether that is a review that needs to be undertaken sooner rather than later.
Sorry, and I've just double checked, and the review on this policy will come up at 2024. So that will fall into the next term. Now we are delving a bit outside of what the recommendation is. We're talking about the policy now. So I'd like to bring us back to the recommendation, which, are there any further questions on it? Yes, Mr Waru.
Kia ora, I'll be brief. Thank you, Madam Chair. So you mentioned waiting, JP. So maybe, is there a way where I can put on the table that the waiting is to include, for the waiting to include preference to mana whenua? And I don't see why that couldn't happen if everything else is complied with, if everything else stacks up. There should be a preference to work with mana whenua, and I'll put it on the table. It's very simple, very straightforward. So if that's included somehow in this kōrero, in this recommendation, then I'd be comfortable with that.
We'll just hand over to Jeff, but I do have a mover for the motion, so I'll leave it to you and then we'll carry on.
Just through the chair, there has been, Mr. Waru, a couple of discussions already within the executive team on exactly what you're asking. I think there is an acceptance in principle of the concept that you're looking for. What we need to do is a little bit more work on how that can actually be built into the actual conditions of the sale effectively, and we'll certainly be doing that around the broader discussion on potential other surplus reserves. So we will need to obviously come back to you.
Thank you. Now, I do have a mover for this motion, moved by Councillor Wang, seconded by Raukawa Tate. I will read it out. That the committee recommends to the council that the land 283 Clayton Road, being lot 29 DPS 131, the land be declared surplus and disposed of using an expression of interest process. That the committee recommends to the council that the Chief Executive Officer is delegated to dispose of the land to the successful party on conclusion of the expression of interest process. We have a mover and a seconder. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Any against? Would you like your vote recorded? Okay, and that's carried. Thank you. Okay. We can note against in the current form. Yeah. So we now have a resolution to go into public excluded. I advise there is one item for consideration in public excluded session, the Sir Howard Morrison Centre project completion. Reasons for it going into confidential are to enable commercial activities, to prevent use of the information for improper gain or advantage. Ask for a seconder and a mover Mover and a seconder that the Operations and Monitoring Committee move into public excluded session. Moved by Councillor Kaifong, seconded by Mr. Waru. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. We'll just give a minute for the live stream to switch off.